Okay. Hello, everyone. For those of you that I have not had the pleasure to meet, my name is Holly Charlotte. I am the city clerk for the city of El Cerrito. I am partly responsible in my capacity here with the membership management and administration for all of our city advisory body members. This training today is open to the public. However, it is a training for all of our advisory body members to receive training on the content for the Handbook for City Advisory Body members. So first, just a couple of quick housekeeping announcements. The chat is disabled in the city's account, so there will not be an opportunity to chat or ask questions. However, I will take time after each section of today's training to take questions. I would ask that you try to hold your questions until those times because we do have a lot of content to get through. And I want to make sure that we get through each section and then we address any questions that anyone may have. The content for the training today will take approximately an hour and a half, and then additional time depending on the amount of questions from our members. So before we get started, based on our agenda, we are going to have an opportunity for anybody who is on the call who's a member of the public that would like to request to speak. Now would be the time to raise your hand. And I do see Cordell has his hand up, and Buddy, I see that your hand is up, although you are an advisory body member, but this is the time for any member of the public who wants to speak. So Cordell, we'll go ahead and start with you.
Can you hear me okay, Holly?
Yes, I can. You can go ahead and begin your comments.
Good. So good evening, advisory body members. My name is Cordell Hendler, and I'm interested in hearing more about the context of how an advisory body works, that type of thing. And then what else? Oh yes, I do have an invitation for the members, so Holly can put this in the record. So on May 6th at 12:30 p.m. at the Richmond Country Club, there will be a Richmond Rotary Club meeting. Our speakers for that meeting will be the city manager's office, who will be telling us about economic development. So lunch is $25 a person. So I will forward all the info to Holly so she can disperse it out. So that's it, and I'm here to learn more about what the committees entail. That's it.
Great, thank you. Buddy, I see your hand raised, but you are, did you have a question now, or were you, since you're one of our advisory body members, this is not the time that you would need to speak if you had questions on the content today? Are you there with us?
Not half the time.
All right. Okay. So I am going to hop right in and let me share my screen. Okay. Okay. So as I mentioned, this is training for our board, commission, and committee members. This is a new requirement that the city council implemented last year, requiring all individuals who are appointed to a board, commission, or committee receive orientation and training on the handbook for city advisory body members. So this can serve as a refresher for several of you on the call who have been serving for some time. And then we also have some newly appointed members with us today who are first-time appointees to a city advisory body. So the content today is going to be broken down into an introduction and overview. We'll talk a little bit about some general rules, as well as different roles and responsibilities that are related to this process, as well as roles and responsibility for you as a member. And then we will cover in depth more the Brown Act, parliamentary procedure, which are the rules in which are followed for making motions and things like that for public meetings. And then we'll talk about where you can get some additional resources. Bear with me, getting my screen set up here to make sure I can see if any hands are raised. So like I said, I will pause for questions at the end of sections. So I would ask that you do hold your questions for content. If you have something else that can't wait, please feel free to use that raise hand feature. And actually, Rebecca, did you have a question?
Yeah, just a quick one, Holly, just a clarification, just so I can share with other members. I understand that all new appointees must go through a training. Is this refresher then a courtesy for ongoing members, or are we also, is it a requirement that each year you participate as a refresher?
A requirement to participate each year. The council simply stipulated that all individuals appointed to an advisory body receive this training. So when someone is appointed for their initial term, they would be required to either participate in a live training such as this, which will be offered one time a year, or they will be required to review the recording, and then they will sign a statement saying that they reviewed that training, and that's how they will receive that orientation. Upon reappointment, members will be asked to take that refresher training, but it is not something that all of our members will have to take each year. We simply extended the invitation to everyone this year since it's the first time that we have done this. Great question. Thank you for that letting me give that clarification.
Thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to jump right into our first section, which is just a bit of an introduction and overview about city advisory bodies. So for ease in today's training, when I mention city advisory bodies, that is referencing all city board commissions and committees so that we can easily move through the content, but I will talk a little bit about what the difference is between those different types of bodies. So advisory bodies are broken down into two categories, either advisory or quasi-judicial and sponsored. So in the city, advisory and quasi-judicial advisory bodies are comprised of boards who have specific expertise in certain areas, or commissions who don't necessarily have specialized expertise, but are in an advisory capacity. Sponsored advisory bodies are the committees that the city has, and these are much more working groups where they are doing things more out in the community, working on programs and outreach and things like that. So they're doing more hands-on work on behalf of the council versus giving more advisory, instead of being in more of an advisory capacity for the city council. So for our agency, the boards that we have are our financial advisory board and our design review board. Our commissions, we have arts and culture, planning, civil service, human relations, parks and rec. And then we also have kind of one outlier, the Citizen Streets Oversight Committee. Even though the title of this body is a committee, it actually functions more as a commission. And it is a committee that was formed as part of a ballot measure. So they do have to follow most of the rules of commissions versus committees for our agency. And then the committees that we have are in the topic areas of aging and older adult programs, crime prevention, economic development, environmental quality, and urban forest. Okay. When we think about how all of these bodies came to be, all 13 of our city advisory bodies were formed by action of the city council. And when they're formed, they are formed by the city council passing either an ordinance, which becomes part of our city's municipal code, or they have created or organized an advisory body through a resolution. And those are the two primary sources where you will see information about membership, terms, attendance rules, a lot of the basic information on what the roles and responsibilities for each of those advisory bodies are. In addition to that, all of our advisory bodies have regulations that have to be followed. And this includes not only regulations that have been put into place by council resolution, but we also have administrative policies, which are policies that are implemented by the city manager, parliamentary procedure, which is related to running the meetings and how those meetings are ran and motions are made and things like that. And then we also have California law. So government code is a big section of California law that we as a government entity have to abide by. And for our advisory bodies, the two largest sections that we have to abide by are the Ralph M. Brown Act, which you hear commonly referred to as the Brown Act. And then there's also some conflict of interest requirements that are part of the Political Reform Act, which we'll also talk about a little bit later. Okay, so looking at first starting at that top level of regulations, the actions that the city council takes the most enforcing action that the council can take is adoption of an ordinance. And the majority of our general rules for our city boards, commissions, and committees is part of our municipal code. There is a full section that has general rules for our city advisory bodies. If there is something in a resolution that is different than an ordinance, that may apply for a specific advisory body. However, if there is no other documentation, no other resolution in effect, then what the general rules are would apply to the advisory body. So most of these rules apply to all of our advisory bodies, but there are some exceptions. So the first area that is covered in the municipal code is term lengths and limits. A full term for all of our members is considered 4 years, and those terms are fixed beginning on March 1st. And those terms have been aligned over the last 3 or 4 years to all end on the same day, but in alternating years, to make it a little bit easier for the council to do an annual, one big annual recruitment for filling those vacancies, and then appointing those individuals to start their terms on March 1st. Any unexpected vacancies that come up throughout the year that council makes an appointment for would be as of the date of appointment. However, it would still end on that March 1st of whatever year the term was set to expire. Boards, commissions, and our Citizen Streets Oversight Committee do have a limitation of 2 terms on each advisory body. So an individual could serve 2 full 4-year terms on the financial advisory body, for example, and then they could go on to serve 2 full 4-year terms on the Park and Recreation Commission. For committees, in 2021, the City Council adopted a resolution which now overrides that general rule in our ordinance that limits all of our committees to 3 terms. So members on committees can serve 3 full 4-year terms. And then the last piece to keep in mind for that fixed term, which some of you may have come across this because of your own appointment, if you are appointed to anything less than a full 4-year term, it's considered a partial term. If you are appointed to a partial term, that partial term does not count towards the 2 or 3 term limit. So an individual may be appointed to fulfill the last 2 or 3 years of someone else's term, and then they can continue to go on and serve 8 or 12 full years on that same advisory body. The next area outlined in the municipal code is the attendance rules. So excused absences versus unexcused absences are defined. And essentially an excused absence is any absence in which you as the advisory body member are in contact with your staff liaison and letting them know that you're not able to attend. 24 hours advance notice is what is requested at a minimum. However, we understand there's unforeseen or unavoidable circumstances that may not allow you to give that advance notice. And in that case, written notice prior to the next regular meeting, as long as you have that communication with your staff liaison, would be considered an excused absence. There is also a provision in there for absences based because of medical reasons, and those absences can go up to 120 days excused. An unexcused absence is again, anything where you have an absence, but then there's no communication or no notification with the staff liaison. As part of that attendance section, there's a couple caveats in there for absences that will automatically trigger what we consider resignation. So if a member has missed 3 consecutive regular meetings and they are unexcused, meaning that person has not been in touch with the staff liaison and also has not attended 3 meetings in a row, then there is an assumption that that individual is automatically resigned, and we would process that and open that seat to be filled by another individual who's able to participate. The other one is an annual review process of the attendance records. And if someone has missed more than half of the regularly scheduled meetings in a calendar year, whether it's excused or unexcused, that is also a trigger for resignation. And then some of the other ways in which someone would have resigned or be considered automatically resigned is if they no longer reside within the city limits, or if they have provided a member of city staff or announced at a public meeting of that advisory body that they are resigning for whatever the reason may be. Okay, so this next section is on the filing and training requirements. All of you should be fairly familiar with most of these requirements, as it's information that is provided to you by my office upon appointment by City Council. And there has been some new training requirements that have been implemented over the past 12 months or so by the City Council. So there's been a lot of communication from my office. And I do appreciate everyone's patience with that as we get everyone up to date with the requirements that the council has adopted. So at this time, when a member is appointed to a city advisory body, they are required to file an oath of office with the city clerk's office prior to attending their first meeting. And that does have to be an original signature. It's one of the few documents that we still cannot accept a scanned copy of. We do need that original signature on file. And then within 30 days of appointment, all members are required to complete 2 hours of ethics training, as well as 1 hour of sexual harassment prevention training. Both of those trainings are good for 2 years. So you will take that within 30 days of appointment, and then 2 years from now, when your certificate is coming due, you'll get notification from our office that you are due to retake that training, and you will have to continue that every 2 years as long as you are serving. And that does transfer from one body to another. So if you serve on one and then you serve on another advisory body, if you've completed either of those trainings, it would be valid for any advisory body. You do not have to take it for each individual appointment to each individual advisory body. And then this training, which you are currently completing, this orientation training, is another requirement that I mentioned that the City Council adopted in 2021. And then for a few of our advisory bodies, our Arts and Culture, Design Review Board, our Financial Advisory Body, and our Planning Commission, they are required to also file a Statement of Economic Interest, Form 700, which is a document that discloses any financial interest that they have, whether it be real estate, investments, salary, things like that, that it is within the jurisdiction that they have some decision-making authority in. And that information is a public document, so that if there is ever a decision that could potentially provide that individual with a personal financial gain by way of voting a certain way on something that comes before them, that individual has an obligation to disclose that conflict. And this document is something that the public has to see and make a determination if they think an individual has voted on something that they have a conflict of interest on. And we'll talk a little bit more about conflict of interest later on. Okay, so before we go into roles and responsibilities, I just want to take a moment to pause and see if there's any questions on this first section of content that I've covered. If you do have a question, feel free. There's not that many of us, so feel free to just unmute and ask, or if you want to raise your hand. Rosa, looks like you have your hand up.
For a lot of questions. So the first one is, I don't want my address on that 700, and it is public. So disclose your address in El Cerrito, and then people can just come and harass you. Or
so we do encourage our filers to put the city hall address on that document, because it is a public document. But however, there are some individuals that may have to disclose information about properties that they own, and typically your primary residence is not reportable because it's already a public document through county record that you own that property. Okay. But yes, everything that is on that document is disclosable to the public. I'm not sure that you have to file one, but if you do, you would actually get that information from CCTA.
Okay.
Okay.
And then just another. Okay. Two more questions that put me at the end. Okay.
Actually, Holly, I have a comment, really, more than a question. Early on, you said that committees, our primary role is to be hands-on and not to make advice to the council and the other city officials. That is not true. The ordinance that created the EQC states specifically that we're supposed to be offering advice, comments to not just the city council, but to city staff and other departments.
There is some advisory capacity, absolutely. That's just in general the high level overview of what those different types of advisory bodies are. Committees do a lot more hands-on work than you see done by boards and commissions. They're out in the community doing things and promoting things, and while they do have an advisory component to it, it's not the same or typically as high level as you see in boards and commissions. And it is, you are correct, we are going to talk a little bit about roles and responsibilities, but each advisory body has specific roles and responsibilities that they have been assigned when they were formed by the city council. And some of those may include providing certain kinds of recommendation or advice to the city council on those topic areas that the committees are responsible for. So that is correct. Your hand up.
Me?
Yes, did you have a
Who's gonna-
question?
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I am on the urban forest, which I see as a committee, and it has an asterisk. Does that mean the Brown Act does not apply to us?
No, the Brown Act does apply to you. Where did you see the asterisk next to your name? I think
Well,
what you
yeah,
may have
I-
seen is
that
the
one
asterisk.
slide.
There was an asterisk for the Citizen Streets Oversight Committee.
Oh,
because
okay.
they have, even though their name is committee, they really follow a lot of the commission rules.
Oh, okay, thank you.
No problem. Any other questions?
2 more questions from Rosa. Just in general, what if I get really, really sick, like cancer, out for 3 months? Can I just say, is there an excuse for super sickness, or do you just reapply when you get better? That's my first question. And then the second question is, I do like this remote Zoom. I'm not no biggie. I don't want to miss. And most of the time I travel, and it was easier to join a meeting remotely. So do we need to amend our laws because of there's a law that says you have to meet in person. So when we go back to meeting in person, sometimes most of us miss the meetings because we're traveling, but we're able to make it. We just can't be physically in El Cerrito. Those are
Right.
my 2 comments.
I'm thinking about the second one and I'm blanking on what your first question was. I'm so sorry. Let me address the remote and then I'll have you repeat your first question for me. So the remote meetings right now, we're operating under an assembly bill that is giving us limited temporary ability to suspend certain requirements of state law, which we're going to talk about in a future section tonight under the Brown Act. And the short answer is once that goes away, we will not be able to do meetings the way that we are doing them now, unless there is some changes in state law. When we go over the Brown Act section, we can certainly talk about that. There is a section for teleconferencing rules, and I'll talk about what that looks like in normal times, as well as what it looks like now. And then forgive me, what was the first question?
First question is, I just have a super illness that's going to be long-term.
Oh,
It's not a
yes.
cold, but it's just a
Yes.
real long illness.
Thank you. So there is a provision that an individual can miss meetings and be absent for a period of 120 days. But after that 120 days, if that individual is still unable to participate, then they would be asked to resign. And the reason for that is because the council wants to make sure that there is enough participation from those that are appointed to the advisory body in order for the work on the advisory body to continue. So if there was a circumstance where someone was too ill to attend and it exceeded that 120 days, and then they were, they got better and wanted to participate again, then they certainly could come back and reapply.
It makes more sense when you explain it ahead of time. Okay, thanks.
No problem. And Susan, your hand's back up. Did you have another question?
No, I didn't. I thought I lowered my hand. So
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, so I'll continue on to our next section, which is going to talk about the roles and responsibilities. So while this training is focused on your role and responsibility and everything you need to know as a city advisory body member, it's also important for you to understand the roles that the other people you will interact with in that capacity, what their role and responsibilities are. The first one that I'm going to talk about is the role of the chair or the vice chair. So there is an annual election of a chair and vice chair for each advisory body, and that is voted on by the members of the advisory body, and it's for a period of 1 year. And that is the individual who is responsible for working closely with the staff liaison in setting the agenda. So when a member of an advisory body, for example, is interested in having something put on the agenda, that request would go to the chair and the staff liaison, and then the two of them would discuss and look at all those requests and build the agenda for the upcoming meeting. They're also the person that presides over the meeting. So each advisory body is a little bit different in terms of who does what between the chair and the staff liaison, but between those two roles, they're the individuals who are making sure that the Brown Act is being observed, roll call and votes are being done, items are introduced. They're the person that is helping to drive the conversation and make sure that the items that are on the agenda are all discussed in the correct order and that the meeting progresses and that the business is attended to. And then if an advisory body has a recommendation or any kind of information that needs to be reported to the city council, the person that would represent the advisory body before the city council would also be the chair. And then of course, the vice chair is there to serve in that capacity in the absence of the chair. The next role is the role of the council liaison. And this is a single member of the city council who is assigned on an annual basis to be the council liaison to your city advisory body. And they have an obligation to keep open communication and report to the advisory body what the council's actions are. And they're supposed to be attending quarterly. However, they are not a seated member of the advisory body. So they are not participating in discussion. They're not attending all meetings. They're not voting on items. They're simply there to be a liaison between the city council and the advisory body. Then the role of the city clerk. Several of you, I'm sure, have heard from Lena Huang. Between her and myself, we comprise the office of the city clerk, and we are responsible for all of the management for our membership. That includes the application and appointment process, making sure all of the requirements that the council has put into place for filing certain forms or completing certain training requirements is something that we also keep up with. We ensure compliance essentially with all of the policies that we have in place. So policies of the municipal code that we talked about, resolutions and any action taken by council. So we're looking at terms, making sure that people are, if someone is termed out, we know that they're no longer eligible. We're looking at attendance to see if any attendance issues have triggered some of the caveats that are in the municipal code. We screen applications to make sure that people are eligible to serve. And then we also do a lot of outreach and work with our city staff liaisons who are assigned by the city manager to support the various advisory bodies so that we can give them tools and resources so that we can be as consistent across the city from advisory body to advisory body as we can be. So talking about staff liaisons, there's some things that staff liaisons do and some things that staff liaisons don't. And some of the highlights that I wanted to cover in terms of what the staff liaisons are responsible for is facilitating meetings. So especially now with our virtual meetings, they're the individual who is facilitating your Zoom meetings, making sure that the public access is there and that individuals are able to speak. They're generating the meeting minutes. They're keeping all of the records for the advisory body. They make sure that the meetings are ran in compliance with all of the requirements, which primarily means the Brown Act and parliamentary procedure. They help advise the members of the advisory body, whether it be on the role and responsibility of the workload that they're doing or what the requirements are. And typically the individual that is assigned as the staff liaison is assigned because they have a certain amount of subject matter expertise that aligns with what that advisory body is responsible for. So they're also the primary source of information for things that are going on in the city so that the advisory body can make informed decisions. And then they are also the conduit for communication. So when we talk more about the Brown Act later, we'll talk about this quite a bit more in depth, but we do have to be careful in how we communicate, especially amongst the advisory body members themselves, to make sure that we're staying in compliance with state law. And so a lot of your communication is funneled through the staff liaison and when necessary, the advisory body chair. And they'll be the conduit for communication. So if there's information that you need you're not having to go and seek out that information or find out who has that information. You're going to the staff liaison, and the staff liaison is assisting you in finding or pointing you in the right direction for what it is that you need. Staff liaisons do not work for the city advisory body. They are an employee of the city, and they are appointed to that role as part of their full-time job as an employee of the city, and they are assigned to that role by the city manager. They don't provide full-time support. Again, this is just one component of many things that they have on their plate. And they also do not provide individual reports or favors or any special consideration to members. So it's very important that everyone is treated equally and that expectations are very clear, that there's not going to be any special consideration or favoritism in terms of workload and things like that. Okay, so moving on into advisory body member do's and don'ts for your roles and responsibilities. So advisory body members are required to understand their role and their scope of responsibility. So you are starting that right here by attending this meeting and going over all of the information that is provided to you in the handbook for advisory body members, which really is your primary resource of information. You are required to follow all of the rules that have been set by the city council, as well as the rules that are in place by state law. You have an obligation to represent the full community, so you should not be looking at representing any special interests. It really is about inclusion and representation for the areas that you are responsible for and the topics that you are responsible for all of El Cerrito, for all of our community. And you do have an obligation to maintain positive working relationships, not only with staff, but with other members of other advisory bodies, with your peers on your own advisory body, with your chair and your staff liaison, your council liaison, etc. Some of the don'ts for advisory body members: you are prohibited from pursuing any unapproved project. So each advisory body has a very specific set of roles and responsibilities, and any work done should be within the confines of that the responsibility of your advisory body. So going off and doing something that hasn't been approved or discussed is not allowed. You also cannot represent any policy of the city, communicate directly with any outside agencies. And with that one, there is some small caveat that if you are working on a work plan or it's in the specific roles and responsibilities of your city advisory body, you may have some communication with outside agencies, but in general, you are not to be representing the voice of the city with any outside agencies. So that communication is reserved, very restricted and reserved for city staff. And then you cannot take anything that has any financial action, whether that is a perceived financial commitment or not, or a real financial action. Advisory body members cannot spend any funds, any city monies whatsoever. So financial actions are restricted. Again, there are some small exceptions to that. For example, our Arts and Culture Commission is very involved in the Public Arts Fund, and they do make decisions about how that money is spent in our community, but that is in close ties with the staff that are responsible for staffing that advisory body. Okay, so conflicts of interest. So we talked about the Form 700, which is the conflict of interest form. And while there are only a handful of advisory bodies that are required to file that specific form, everyone that is a city advisory body may have a conflict of interest. So this is something that is relevant to everyone. So a conflict of interest essentially is when an individual is participating in a vote that could potentially have a financial impact on them personally. Participating when that type of a conflict exists can invalidate the action, and it can also expose the individual to penalties and sanctions. So if you are ever in doubt about something, it is always safe to call your staff liaison, have a conversation with them. If they can't answer whether or not you should seek legal advice or whether or not you should recuse yourself from participating in that vote, they'll they'll consult with myself and or our legal counsel to help you get an answer for that. We have done that several times over the year. It's much better to be safe than sorry, and ask that question before you are taking that vote. So a conflict, essentially when an individual has a conflict, they should be recusing themselves and not participating in that vote. A conflict exists whenever your position is the position that you have influences a government decision, and that decision affects you personally. So one example of this is if you were on the planning commission and you are looking at approving a development project that is on a block or next door to a rental property that you own in the city, that development may increase the value of those properties. And so you may have a financial gain by that value going up if that development goes forward. So that could be a conflict of interest. So that's something that you would likely need to recuse yourself and not vote on, because you have that property that is within, I think it's 200 feet of a development project that could be significantly impacted by that. Let's see. So again, whenever there is any doubts, seek advice through your staff liaison as a first step. And then there is also a provision about no free rides. This is actually in the California Constitution, that anybody who holds an appointed office, so all of the advisory body members would fall into this, cannot accept free passes or discounts for riding any public transit. So make sure you're not taking any of those type of things that you might see coming up, because that could violation of that could potentially forfeit your seat on the advisory body. Okay. And then this is the newest action that the City Council has taken. So this code of conduct was something that was actually implemented by the City Council in 2005. And the spirit of this code of conduct that was adopted in 2005 is incorporated into the advisory body handbook. And we have already talked about some of these. However, the council in 2021, when they did their own administrative processes, they updated their own code of conduct. And in February of this year, they revised the advisory body code of conduct as well. This is something that has been very important to the City Council, and making sure that it's very clear what the expectations of advisory body members are. And because of that, some of this may be a repeat, and it will be a little bit more texty in this part of the conversation, but I am going to go over all of the items that are in that code of conduct verbatim, to make sure that they're very clear. And then I'll give you guys an opportunity to ask questions about this as well. So the first one is working for the City Council and the common good. All advisory body members shall follow all of these things. So number one, work with the City Council on the common good of the people of El Cerrito and not for any private or personal interests. Again, we talked about this, right? It's very important to make sure you're representing all of our community, not just certain parts of our community or personal interests that you may have. Number two, endeavor to treat all members of the public and issues before them in a fair and equitable manner. So making sure that you are hearing everyone and that you are being well informed in the decisions that you're making. Number three, making impartial decisions free of bribes, unlawful gifts, narrow political interests, and financial or other personal interests that impair independence of judgment or action. This is something that is part of the Political Reform Act, elected officials, ethics training, all of these things, making sure that you're making decisions that are for the good of the community and not for personal financial gain. Number four, make decisions that are fair, objective, made in public, and understandable. So this is making sure that you are well informed in the decisions that you're making, and also making sure that you're adhering to the requirements necessary to make sure that that discussion and that decision is made in public at a public meeting. Number five, fully participate in their meetings and other public forums while demonstrating respect and courtesy to others, practicing civility and decorum in discussion and debate, listening courteously and attentively, and engaging in effective communication. Advisory body members are expected to contact their staff liaison if they cannot attend a scheduled meeting. So this is in support, again, of those attendance rules that are part of our municipal code and those general rules, making sure that you are fully present and participating in the advisory body and that you are doing so in a respectful manner with everyone that you are interacting with. Number six, act in an efficient manner, making decisions and recommendations based upon research and facts in accordance with the Brown Act to allow full and equal participation in public process. Again, we're going to talk about in the next section, we're going to talk about the Brown Act, but it's very important to adhere to those rules to make sure that, again, those decisions and votes and actions of the advisory body are made in the public, in the correct public way. Number 7, refrain from abusive conduct, personal charges, or verbal attacks upon the character, motives, ethics, or morals of other members of their board, other boards, city staff, or members of the public. So again, making sure that everyone is being treated equally and that you are hearing all of the information with an open mind, and make sure that the interactions that you are having with other individuals is respectful. Number 8, refrain from negative comments regarding any person or group based on any protected category. This could be race, gender, sexual orientation, national origin, religion, marital status, etc. Number 9, respect and preserve the confidentiality of information provided to them concerning confidential matters of the city, and refrain from disclosing any information received confidentially without proper legal authorization, nor use such information to advance the personal, financial, or private interest of themselves or others. Number 10, use their title when conducting official city business and carefully consider whether they are exceeding or appearing to exceed their authority. This includes use of their title in any personal setting, community event, speech, or any other activity that is not facilitated by the individual's advisory body. So I want to really emphasize this area because it's really important to understand the difference between coming to a meeting of a public advisory body or sharing with someone that you are a member of an advisory body versus advertising yourself or having on social media the title of advisory body member, having that title in connection with anything outside of a advisory body meeting or an event that is hosted by that meeting. This includes, again, expressing the title in any way that can promote an individual personally. So using that title in any way to try and elevate your status or to try and get business in any way is prohibited under this code of conduct. Particularly when there's any financial related responsibility. So anything that, again, can affect you financially, now you're getting into the conflict of interest areas. Even if you're not making a decision, you're levying your title as a voluntary advisory body member to elevate your status to try and increase a financial benefit that you may have personally would go against this code of conduct. And then just a reminder that when things come up that get into the gray area or get into these kinds of financial conflict of interest areas, it's important to remember that absolutely any and every action taken by a city advisory body member can be appealed by the city council. Appealed to the city council. So you want to make sure that you don't have to worry about the integrity of the vote that is taken or the action that is taken by the advisory body. Number 11 is respecting established channels of communication with city staff, treating staff members professionally and not attempting to pressure or influence discussions, recommendations, workloads, schedules, or department priorities without the express approval of city council. This includes refraining from portraying personal opinions or views as the view of the advisory body as a whole, and respecting the role of the advisory body chair, who's responsible for conveying recommendations and communicating on behalf of the advisory body to the city council. We talked a little bit about this in the staff liaisons, making sure that it's understood that staff liaisons are not employees of the advisory body, but they are employees of the city, and they are following direction of the city staff who's responsible for supervising them. And then the one additional thing on this one that I want to point out, there's absolutely no reason or anything to prohibit any individual who is a member of a city advisory body from expressing their personal opinion to the city council. You just have to make sure that if you choose to mention that you are a member of a city advisory body, that you are very explicit and very clear that you are there as an individual and you are speaking on behalf of your own personal opinion and not the opinion of the advisory body as a whole. Number 12, not attempt to solicit any type of political support from city council or city staff. And finally, number 13, comply with all rules and regulations that are established by state and local law, as well as those established by the city council. And then all of these items, violation of any part of this code of conduct could result in removal by the city council. One of the things that we didn't talk about under the general rules for advisory body members is that all city advisory body members serve at the pleasure of the city council. They are appointed by the city council and they can be removed at any time by the city council. So violation of the code of conduct or any of these areas is one of those things that would likely expedite or increase the desire of the city council to potentially move an individual from serving on a city advisory body. So I know that was a lot of text, but I, again, want to emphasize the importance of this code of conduct, the importance that the council has put on this code of conduct, which is why we kind of went over it verbatim. I'm going to pause here to see if there are any questions on this second section of roles and responsibilities. So if anybody has a question, feel free to ask or raise your hand and we can address those and then move on to the Brown Act.
I need to make sure I understand.
Okay.
Do not post on Facebook that I'm a member of a committee. Do not post that. Don't.
You should, not that you can't mention that you are a member of an advisory body, but you should not, for example, have a Facebook account that says, Holy Charlotte, Arts and Culture Commissioner. You should not be advertising, your social media should not be listing your title. That doesn't mean that you can't reference it on social media that you are a member of that advisory body, but you should not be representing any social media account as if it is a social media account that is tied to either the advisory body or to the city. Does that make sense?
Kind of, yes. Then the next question is, sometimes we want to encourage our neighbors. We want to announce there's an event and we post on social media.
Yes.
So we can post flyers that are officially sanctioned by, we can do that.
Yes,
we can
absolutely.
Post
yes,
okay.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. That's it for me.
Okay. I'm not sure who was speaking, but if that wasn't Pamela, I see you have a hand up. Did you have a question? No? Okay. Any other questions?
I forgot I was muted. Are the slides going to be available afterwards in the event that we would like to reference back to them, especially with the information you've provided on the code of conduct?
Yes. So I will be posting this with the agenda and the meeting recording following today's training. So this will be available on the website. However, I will just mention, thank you for asking that question. This code of conduct is incorporated into the current version of the handbook, which is posted on the city's website, and the code of conduct, the resolution for the code of conduct itself is also posted on the membership tools webpage, which we'll talk about that in the resource section at the end of the training today.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so let's, yes, Miss Allison.
Hey, I'm so sorry. I'm still just looking for more nuance too. I know you've spoken to it a lot, but the social media policy, like if we do have a personal account and we're trying to promote events, it is okay to mention that you're a member. Do we need to, does it help if we put like a disclaimer saying like, posts are on my personal behalf, not on behalf of the commission? Or is there anything else we can do to help make that clear?
That is a great idea. Disclaimers are always a safe way to go, saying that the information that you're sharing is on behalf of you as an individual, not on behalf of the city advisory body or the city. We definitely want you to be promoting the different things that your advisory body is participating in and things like that. Again, it's just cautioning the use of the title on your social media account, naming your social media account in a way where it looks like it's tied to the agency. And then again, expressing if your title or your connection to that advisory body is part of the information that you're posting about, making sure that it's very clear in the language that you use that you are speaking about your individual opinion as a member of the El Cerrito community who happens to be a member of this advisory body, but not that you're speaking on behalf of the advisory body or the opinions of the city.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Great questions. Rosa.
I have another one now. I don't do this, but I just want to clarify. Can I promote on my social media account, I like this council member or I support this measure? Tell all my friends, vote on this measure. Never mention that I'm an advisory member, but just, can I be political in social media?
Yes, you can be political. You can be, things like that are not prohibited. What is prohibited is trying to solicit political support from city council or city staff. So whether it's for you as an individual who may be interested in doing something in politics, maybe you're trying to get support in something that you're interested in doing or something that you are in favor of or support of, there has to be a separation between what you do in your personal life and what you do in your connection with city council and city staff and your role as an advisory body member. Questions? Okay, last call before I move on. Okay, so we'll move into the next section, which is on the Ralph M. Brown Act, which we commonly again refer to as the Brown Act. So the Brown Act is a section that is contained in government code, and it is an access to information law about open meetings and open deliberations. So there are a lot of things that are defined in the Brown Act, including what meetings are, what interaction the public can have, posting requirements, how that meeting can be held, where that meeting can be held, etc. Which we're going to talk about all of that. But the basic gist of the Brown Act is that meetings of a government agency are open and public with advance notification so that a member of the community or anybody who's interested in that information has an opportunity to decide whether or not they want to hear the discussion and whether they want to provide any kind of feedback before a vote is taken to take action. And in the Brown Act, there is a definition of what constitutes a legislative body that is required to adhere to the rules of the Brown Act. And that does include all of our city board, commission, and committees that are appointed and formed by the city council, who is also subject to the Brown Act. So all of our city advisory bodies are subject to the requirements that we're about to discuss. There is no exceptions. So the first section is just some basic definitions. So a meeting is defined as a majority of members who get together to hear, discuss, deliberate, or take action on anything that's within the subject matter jurisdiction of what they're responsible for. For meetings, there are meetings of the full advisory body, and then there are also what's called a ad hoc committee or a standing committee meeting. There is a differentiation between the two of these, and this is something that we've had a lot of conversation over the last 12 months with several of our advisory bodies to make sure that it's clearly understood the difference between the two. So an ad hoc committee is a temporary, potentially reoccurring meeting that is on a limited duration, that is comprised of less than a quorum of members, and it's for a single or specific purpose. And when that purpose is completed or that task is completed, then that ad hoc committee is dissolved. An example of this is you could form an ad hoc committee to create an initial draft of your advisory body's work plan. That ad hoc committee then comes back to the full advisory body. They discuss, they take action on that, and then the ad hoc committee is dissolved. Meetings of ad hoc committees are the only thing that are not, the only type of meeting under the Brown Act that are not required to meet in the public. So they don't have to be open to members of the public. They don't have to post information in advance. They can simply have that, you know, 2 or 3 individuals, depending on how the number of advisory body members that are on a given advisory body. They can get together, they can work on that work product, and then bring that information back to the full membership. This is different than a standing committee, which, while it's also less than a quorum of members, is a permanent ongoing committee that is formed to discuss a part of what the advisory body is responsible for, but it's not something that ever goes away. So there may be, I believe it's the EQC has a standing committee that is responsible for interviewing individuals who are interested in serving on the EQC. So they hold those committees, or they hold those interviews, and they interview those candidates. Those meetings are open to the public, and then they go back to the full board and they take action on whether or not they're going to recommend that individual for appointment. So ad hoc, temporary, limited duration, single purpose, goes away when it's gone. Standing committee, ongoing subject matter that is discussed on an ongoing regular basis. Standing committees are subject to the Brown Act, meetings of that group. Ad hoc committees are not. Okay. A regular meeting is defined as a meeting that is set at a specific date, time, and location that is set by resolution or ordinance. And one of the things that advisory bodies are required to do annually is adopt a regular meeting calendar for the year. And the reason for that is most of our formation documents here at the city only stipulate how often an advisory body is required to meet. So everybody has to meet once a month, but the date, the specific date or reoccurring timing, right? The second Tuesday of the month or the third Thursday of the month, the time and the location are not set by resolution or ordinance. So by having the advisory body adopt that regular meeting schedule on an annual basis, now that information has been adopted, it's in compliance with the Brown Act, and it can be called a regular meeting. These meetings require an agenda of what is going to be discussed, posted 72 hours in advance, and that does require a physical posting at the city's posting board at City Hall, the community center, and the library. And that is a stipulation in our municipal code that all 3 locations require that physical posting. The Brown Act just requires a physical posting at the location where the meeting is taking place, as well as posted on the website if the agency has one, which the city does. So all city advisory bodies have a website on our city's main website in which they post their meeting materials, including their agendas prior to those meetings taking place. And then regular meetings require an opportunity for public comment to be heard on any matter that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of that advisory body, whether that's a specific discussion item on the agenda or not. So if it's something that the advisory body has the ability to take action on, then members of the public are required to have an opportunity to speak on that. A special meeting, very similar, but with a few caveats. It's still a meeting of the advisory body, but it's held outside of that normal date, time, and location that is set in that annual meeting schedule. So even if you meet on the second Tuesday of the month at 7 p.m., if you decide that you need to meet at 5 o'clock because you have more items on your agenda, then you have to adhere to the special meeting requirements because the time has changed, even though the date and the location have not. Requirements for special meetings are only 24 hours advance notice, and in those same physical and online posting locations. The city does in all circumstances, whenever possible, still adhere to 72 hours for special meetings, but the Brown Act only requires 24 hours advance notice. And then public comments can only be made on items that are on the agenda. So this is the intention of this is that typically special meetings are meetings that are held because there is something that needs to be addressed that perhaps can't wait until the next regular meeting, or it's a lengthy discussion that requires more time. And so the intention in this is that the comments that are made at those meetings are made only on the items that are on the agenda, not on anything that could be within the subject matter jurisdiction. This is not typically as much as impactful for advisory bodies as it is for legislative bodies like city councils and board of supervisors. But sometimes, the public comment period for items not on the agenda can be very lengthy, and then it can start to prohibit or limit the ability of the business on the meeting to be conducted. So that is the reason for that limitation. Serial meetings are probably one of the most important things for our advisory body members to understand, because it is the one area that is most commonly inadvertently violated under the Brown Act. So a serial meeting is when a majority of members engage in some series of communication, whether it's in direct or indirect. And in that communication, there's discussion, deliberation, even if it's just general consensus in terms of action one way or another on something that is within the subject matter jurisdiction. Now that advisory body has inadvertently taken action and made a decision without having that discussion being held in public. So there's two types of serial meetings that are defined. The first is a daisy chain, which, as you can see on that diagram, you have member A has a conversation with member B, and then member B has a conversation with member C and talks about the conversation that they had with member A and member B, or sorry, with member A. And then as it goes around that daisy chain, now you get over to member C or member D, and there's individuals that have all shared their thoughts on a particular action. Maybe they've talked about how they are going to vote or want to vote. And now essentially they've had that conversation and they've kind of come to a conclusion about what action they're going to take without that public being open, that discussion being open to the public. The other is a hub and spoke. And this one is an example where it's a single person who is disseminating that conversation and information. So you have member A in the middle who has a conversation with member B, and then has a conversation with member C and discusses what was discussed with member B, and so on and so forth. And now that person in the middle has caused a majority of members to engage in those communications. So when you see information either from myself or staff liaisons about making sure that advisory members do not reply or send email to all members of an advisory body, this is the primary reason. Because even if you send an email to all advisory body, all of the members on your advisory body, and it's for something very small, routine scheduling, something along those lines, the reply all can quickly change, and that conversation can quickly change to something that shouldn't be discussed, and it can get out of control. So in order to help control that, one of the ways we do that is staff liaisons will BCC board members to make sure that the reply all is not accidentally or inadvertently done. And when staff liaisons see that there is communication being sent to all advisory body members that's not coming from city staff, then we will let you know that that could be a potential violation, and we'll make sure you understand that that's an action that should not be taken. This part of the Brown Act is the primary reason for that and why that's so important. Okay, the Brown Act also has specific requirements of information that should be contained on the agenda. This includes the date, time, and location of the meeting, as well as who an individual can contact if they have an ADA accommodation requirement. There needs to be an ample description of every item of business that will be discussed. Items that are not listed cannot be discussed. And again, the reason for that is to make sure that members of the public have an opportunity to decide if they want to hear or provide comments on a given topic. If it's not listed on the agenda, they don't know it's being discussed, they can't make that decision. Public comment for agendas, there again is that subject matter jurisdiction for regular meetings where people can make comments on anything that the advisory body can take action on. And then they also are required to have an opportunity to provide public comment on each agenda item that is listed on the agenda. The agenda again is how the meeting information is provided. So the agenda itself is what is required to be posted 72 hours in advance. That is the public meeting notification, or 24 hours for special and emergency meetings. Our advisory bodies will never encounter the need for an emergency meeting. That really is for natural disasters. We've had a lot of emergency meetings related to wildfires and floods, and we had a lot early on in the pandemic, things that are affect the health and safety of our community, which are things that city council would be meeting, not for advisory bodies. Meeting materials is another area that's outlined in the Brown Act. So there is a requirement that any meeting material that is provided 72 hours prior to the meeting, when the members are provided access, the public is also required access. And my apologies, I misspoke, less than 72 hours. So once you've gotten below that 72-hour mark, if you want to provide additional information to the membership, that information is also posted on the city's advisory body page as supplemental information, so that the public has access to the same information that the membership has access to. If there's information provided during the meeting by city staff, they have a requirement to make sure that's accessible to the public. So in-person meeting terms, that would be done by making sure that there's copies available to the public. And if there's something that's provided during meetings, if it's a visual thing on Zoom, such as this PowerPoint presentation, that's available to everyone. And then those materials will be provided as supplemental materials online following the meeting. And then anything that the public may want to provide to advisory bodies during the meeting would be included and provided as supplemental materials after the meeting as well. Meeting discussion, again, I know that I'm repeating this, but I want to make sure and reiterate this because it's really one of the primary functions of what the Brown Act is intending to do. Discussion is limited to what is on the agenda. So there has to be limitation of discussion at the meetings between members of the public and members of the advisory body for things that are not on the agenda. So when you're talking about like the public comment forum where individuals can speak about anything that's within the subject matter jurisdiction, advisory body members need to make sure that they're careful not to be responding to public comment, because that can start to create a discussion. And now you've moved into an area where you're discussing something that is not on the agenda. That doesn't prohibit brief responses for things that have been asked about or brought up by public comment, but it should be limited to, a statement or a response to a question, a brief announcement of something, or a request to come back at a future meeting with an agenda item to discuss that particular topic. Okay, let's see. And then the other thing that I just want to, oops, getting ahead of myself. Sorry about that. The other thing that I just want to emphasize, because I think this is one of the areas where there's a little bit of a misconception when it comes to having members of the public comment at these advisory body meetings. While the Brown Act is intended to be an access to information law, it's also a law that's put into place to ensure that legislative bodies and advisory bodies have the ability to conduct the business that needs to be done. If there is too much interaction with members of the public and public discussion in those business meetings where business needs to be conducted, it's prohibitive of those things being able to move forward and be concluded and have action taken. So it really does work both ways. It's making sure that the members of the public have an opportunity to have their opinions be heard and listen to the discussion that's being had, but at the same time also making sure that the members that are responsible for taking action and conducting the business at that meeting can make sure that those decisions get voted on and that those items are moved forward. Okay, so teleconferencing. So I mentioned this earlier. Right now, we are in it feels, almost like it's the new norm, but we are still in new territory, even 2 years into this pandemic. A lot of things have changed. There's been a lot of moving parts in legislation, but currently we are operating under some legislation that was passed that essentially suspends certain requirements of the Brown Act. So these requirements have not been taken out of state law, so they still exist as part of the Brown Act. But this legislation has provided an opportunity when certain circumstances are in place to suspend some of those requirements. And essentially, the primary pieces of that puzzle are that AB 361 requires that there is a declared state of emergency and that there are recommendations about holding meetings in person being a risk to the health and welfare of the individuals attending the meeting. So it suspends these areas of the Brown Act that are lined out. So it allows a public agency to hold a meeting 100% remotely, as long as it is providing the opportunity for live public comment at that meeting. So an agency, for example, could not have a remote Zoom meeting and only allow public comment to be provided in writing prior to the meeting. They have to allow public comment to be heard at the time that the advisory body or legislative body is having the conversation about whatever it is they're taking action on. It also allows an agency to not have to provide an in-person location for participation. So an agency can decide that the only way to participate is via remote options, whether it be live streaming on websites or through broadcasts on Comcast, through YouTube, through Zoom. They do not have to provide a physical location for participation. The only part of the Brown Act with regard to teleconferencing that is still currently in place is that all votes must be done by roll call. This can get repetitive, especially if you have a lot of items on the agenda and if you're on a committee that has 15 members, but it is a requirement that anytime roll call is done to determine who is present at the meeting, as well as any vote that is taken, that each individual member's name is called and that individual then states their yes or no vote or abstain vote. And then there's a determination about whether or not that vote has passed. When we go back in person, when we're not operating under this temporary legislation, the requirements for teleconferencing that are in state law are actually quite prohibitive for the individual on the advisory body board or on the advisory body. There are requirements that wherever the individual is calling in from, the agenda has to be posted at that location, as well as it has to be open and accessible to any individual in the public who wants to attend. So if an individual wants to participate from their home, for example, they will have to open up their home to anyone who shows up and wants to participate. The address of where the individual is participating from has to be listed on the agenda, along with where the other members are participating from. And then at least a quorum of members have to participate from within the jurisdiction. So while one member may be able to participate from out of state at another location, a majority of the members have to be within the jurisdiction of the city in order for them to be able to all participate and hold that meeting, with some members via teleconference. So again, I got ahead of myself there, apologize. So with AB 361, again, in remote public meetings, we are not required to provide a physical location. We have the ability to provide public testimony via Zoom, and for our agency, we allow written public comment at any time, but if the individual submitting it wants to guarantee that the council sees it prior to taking action, we do set a deadline in advance of the meeting, and then anything that comes in after that, if it's manageable to manage the inbox, then it's sent directly at that time to the council member. But if it's during the council meeting, the council may not see it until the following day with supplemental materials. And that is a practice we take with all of our city advisory bodies. Members can participate from any location. So the members of the advisory body, we do not have to have a quorum within the jurisdiction. And then attendance and all votes are taken by roll call. and otherwise all other Brown Act provisions apply. So there's no other area of the Brown Act that has been suspended outside of those few things related to teleconferencing. And then there are some provisions in the Brown Act for enforcement and penalties. So it is a misdemeanor criminal action if there is willful intent to deprive the public of information, and that is against the individual who takes action to willfully deprive the public of information. And there are civil remedies, including the district attorney or any interested party can pursue a Brown Act violation. And the largest consequence to the agency is that if a Brown Act violation is found, there is a demand to remedy that, and it invalidates the action that was taken. So for example, if an ordinance was passed by the city council that was not properly noticed and is found to be a violation of the Brown Act, that ordinance could not go into effect until it started back at the beginning of the process, went through the process properly with the proper notification, before they could move forward with whatever action that ordinance was taking. And then there are attorney's fees if the individual asking for remedy prevails. Okay. I know it's a lot of content, so I'm going to pause here to see, to take any questions that you guys have on the Brown Act. Rebecca.
Hey, quick question, Holly. I was at a public meeting, not in El Cerrito, just last night. And I was in the agenda. This particular commission has an agenda review, and committee members could add a new item. And I was kind of surprised because how would the public be able to know that that was going to be on the agenda? So I was just curious if that was perhaps not appropriate in, or is that something that you can do in the course of a meeting?
So that's a great thing to see, because that is something that would not be in compliance with the Brown Act. Now, I don't know if this body is required to adhere to the Brown Act, but I will tell you there is a provision in the Brown Act. It's extremely narrow, that you can add an item to the agenda with a 4/5 vote approval of the membership to add it, but that is only in a situation where there is a dire need that item be heard, in order for something along the lines of like health and safety and things like that. I think that in my time here in the last 3 years, and actually I don't recall any time that we did that in my prior experience in the last 12 years, but we did that on one occasion, and it was for a grant or something for matching, some type of matching funds for something that the city did not get information for until the day of the meeting. And the deadline was going to be like 2 days following. And so they did enact that clause, but it's a very narrow thing. And so I'm surprised to see something like that. However, I do often see discussion about upcoming agendas and items that are discussed for upcoming agendas, but adding an agenda item on the fly is really not something that can be done by our advisory bodies. There really isn't any circumstance that would be appropriate. And I train on the Brown Act for city clerks across the state. And one of the things I always joke about is that provision is not applicable just because someone forgets to put something on the agenda. So you can't use it for just any matter.
Thanks, Holly. And one quick follow-up. Is it appropriate to rearrange items, the order of items on the agenda once the meeting commences, after, let's say, the public comment, after the public comment on non-agenda items?
Yes. So this is something that is common, actually, and there's nothing that prohibits that from being done. Oftentimes, if there's maybe a presenter that has not gotten there on time, or there's a need because someone needs to leave for something or whatnot, there may be a rearranging on the agenda, and that's perfectly acceptable as long as it's announced at the meeting and it's noted in the minutes of the meeting. There's, you're noting that the items were heard out of order, but it is something that happens often. I have seen often, and it's typically in the legislative body's rules of order that at the beginning of the meeting, there can be a request if there is anyone on the legislative body who would like to hear an item out of order for any given reason. Great questions. Thank you. Any other questions? I know several of you had gotten some refresher on Brown Act, so this part is probably not as new of information. So, okay, so I will move on then into parliamentary procedure. So parliamentary procedure is the rules that govern how public meetings are ran. So it defines things like decorum, quorum, motions, and votes. And for the city, we have adopted Robert's Rules of Order, which to check, because I think I might have actually put, this is a typo, my apologies. So the city used to have Robert's Rules of Order, but it has recently adopted Rosenberg's Rule of Order, which is what the training is based on. This is just a typo of what I have written here. But Rosenberg's Rules of Order is what is recommended actually by the League of California Cities. It is a parliamentary procedure that is more specific to advisory bodies or legislative bodies that are smaller in size. So anywhere from 5 to 7 to maybe 15 is what it's focused on, versus Robert's Rules of Order is much more for very large groups like Congress and things like that that have 30, 40, X amount of individuals. So Rosenberg's Rules of Order is what the city follows. The first area that's outlined in the parliamentary procedure is decorum. So it talks about the respectful way to interact with your peers when you're conducting a public meeting. So the role of the chair, one of the things that is the acceptable practice is for if an individual on the advisory body wishes to speak, that they ask for permission from the chair before they do. This helps make sure that people are not talking over each other, and it helps make sure that the discussion, that there's no confusion in who's speaking, and that everybody has an opportunity to speak and that the discussion can move forward. It outlines kind of the basic format of how a given agenda item discussion would go. So typically the chair will announce what the item is so that the members of the public and everyone on the advisory body knows what's being discussed. There's some type of report or information that is presented. Sometimes that's by a member of the advisory body. Sometimes it's by city staff or an outside contact that may be coming in and presenting information. Then there's an opportunity for the members on the advisory body to ask questions about the information that they had just received. Then it's typically a good time to pause and take public comment if there is any. And then after public comment is taken, typically there's some more discussion by members of the advisory body that may include some of the comments that they heard, as well as sharing information or perspective of how they feel about the item. And then there's a motion and a second, and then the membership votes to take action. Sometimes there's no action to take. Sometimes it's just receiving that information. So there may not be that vote at the end, but typically that's the way that an individual agenda item is moved through. Parliamentary procedure also outlines what is a quorum. So a quorum, it's the minimum number of individuals who have to be present in order to conduct a public meeting. So there's general quorum rules, and agencies often have additional rules for quorum that may be outside of the general rule. So in general, a quorum is a majority of members of an advisory body. For us, because we have, especially our committees with 15 membership, our quorum, it's a majority of the members who are currently appointed. So what that means is, even if it's a 7-member advisory body, if there are only 5 members currently appointed and there's a couple of vacancies, a quorum is only going to be a majority of the 5 that are appointed. It's not a majority of the 7 seats that exist on the advisory body. The arts and culture, planning, and design review all have a requirement of a minimum of 3 members to meet. So if it's a circumstance where, for example, it's a 5-member board and you only have 3 members who are appointed, The general rule would mean that you can have a meeting and a quorum would be 2 individuals, but those 3 bodies have a requirement of at least 3 members present in order to have a quorum to hold a meeting. So that's one of the few caveats in our quorum rules where those 3 advisory bodies are a little bit different than the general rule. If there is not a quorum, then the meeting cannot take place. So even if you convene a meeting and you give it a reasonable amount of time, which typically is 15 to 30 minutes, but we don't typically wait that long because usually staff liaisons will hear from the members and know that they aren't able to attend. So if you know that someone is not able to attend and you're not going to have that quorum, then that meeting essentially is canceled without even starting because you cannot meet without that quorum. If you're waiting to hear from someone, then customarily you give it at least, 15 to 30 minutes after the notice start time to see if any other members are able to join before you determine that that meeting has been canceled. Sorry about that. My mouse is very sensitive. It's ready to get right through this. Okay, so the next area that is outlined in Rosenberg's Rule of Order is motions. And motions are the way in which that a member of an advisory body communicates their idea or their position on something. So it's the mechanism that is used to start the process of taking a vote in order to take action on something. A motion comes with a second, and then it's followed by a vote on that proposed action. At any given time, there cannot be more than 3 motions that have been made and not voted on that are open or on the table, is what it's called. So at any given time, there cannot be more than 3 motions to consider. The vote is taken on the most recent motion first. So if there are 3 motions, a first motion is made, then a second motion, then a third motion, that third motion is voted on first. If that passes, the first 2 motions are not voted on. If that motion does not pass, then the body would go to the second motion and vote on that motion. And then same thing would go all the way up to the first motion made. One caveat in here, which we don't really promote, but just in line with what the Rosenberg Rules of Order state, technically a second is not required. However, it is a good practice because it at least shows a stronger support of a vote being taken on a particular motion. It is at the discretion of the chair to determine or decide that a vote will move forward, even if it does not remove a second. But essentially, if you think about it, if the chair is making that decision, essentially the chair is themselves choosing in most cases to be the person saying that they want that motion to be taken forward for a vote. So it really is kind of getting a second anyways, but it's technically not required. However, it is a practice that most of us observe in making sure that there's a motion in a second before a vote is taken. There are 3 types of motions that are outlined in Rosenberg's Rules of Order. And the intention of this is really to try and make it not too complicated, but give an opportunity for flexibility and conversation and circumstances where membership may not all have the same view on something. So the 3 types of motions are a basic motion, which is how the idea of something is first introduced to the body to vote on. A motion to amend is taking that first idea that was introduced and changing some component of it, but it's not changing the basic premise of the vote. And a substitute motion, instead of modifying a part of the basic motion, it is actually introducing a completely different idea than the main motion. So those are the definition of the 3 different motions. And I have an example here of a basic motion could be moving to approve construction of a restaurant. A motion to amend would be moving forward with a restaurant that includes outdoor dining. And then a substitute motion would be moving to construct a park instead of a restaurant. So the same parameters and basic parts of the action are the same, but you can see in that basic motion, a restaurant and a park are 2 very different things. So it's a basic versus a substitute motion. It's a second idea. Whereas your motion to amend is taking that idea of that first motion and just either building on it or modifying or tweaking one part of it. So maybe someone makes a motion to adopt a contract for a period of 5 years. Someone may amend that to adopt that contract for a period of 4 years. That would be another suggestion or another example of a motion to amend. And then just a couple notes. So when you are doing this, there's not always the requirement to be so formal in the parliamentary procedure. So if there is a motion that is on the table and there is some conversation by the other members about potentially modifying that motion, there can simply be a friendly amendment, which only requires the person who made and seconded the motion to agree to that modification. So if someone introduces something, someone wants to introduce that outdoor dining, for example, for the restaurant, that can be a discussion and conversation. And if the person who made the motion to begin with is open to that, they can certainly take that as a friendly amendment. And then really it just becomes part of that basic motion. It doesn't have to be as formal as doing a motion to amend. And then at any time, if a motion that has been made, if an individual decides that they want to withdraw that motion, they can do that. It doesn't require the person who made a second to agree to it, and it doesn't require a vote. That person can simply withdraw the motion that they put on the table. Okay. All motions are subject to discussion and debate. So a lot of times at these meetings, you kind of see it go one of two ways. You either see a motion that's put forward and then there's substantial discussion and debate on that, and then the body will take action. And sometimes there's an introduction or information provided. There's substantial discussion by the advisory body, and they kind of come to consensus through that discussion itself. And that is how the motion is made. So then the motion is made and there's not really much left to discuss because they've already been discussing it. And the motion is comprised of kind of what that discussion by the membership was. But when the former happens and that motion is made and then there is substantial discussion, there is no limit on the length of time to debate that item. However, the chair has the discretion at any time to decide to move that motion forward and call for a vote on that item. So the chair does have the ability to limit that debate, but there is not a set time frame in which you have to stay within the parameters of in discussing an individual motion. Some exceptions to the debatable and the ability to discuss and debate a motion is a motion to adjourn. This is required only if there are still items remaining to discuss. So if someone wants to make a motion to adjourn, there's no discussion or debate. There's simply a vote about whether or not the advisory body is willing to adjourn that meeting if there are still items remaining to discuss. Now, if you're at the end of the meeting and it's a simple adjournment of the meeting and all of the items have been discussed on the agenda, that's simply adjourning the meeting. That doesn't require a motion in order to conclude the meeting. There's also a motion to recess, and essentially this is a request to take some kind of recess or break. You see this when there is lengthy meetings that are going for, hours at a time, and the membership needs a chance to, have 5 minutes to collect themselves, get a drink of water, whatever it may be. So a motion can be made to recess, and that is also voted on right as the motion is made. And then there's also a motion to table. Making a motion to table essentially is ending the discussion, and that motion can contain a date and time specific to continue that discussion, or it can simply be to bring it back at a future meeting. So this is essentially done by someone other than the role of the chair, who has the discretion to move forward on an item. It's asking for the discussion to end and postponing taking action on that item to a future date. All right, and then the last area in parliamentary procedure is the process for voting. So in order for a motion to pass, it requires a majority of those in attendance to vote in favor of the motion. A majority is defined as half of the membership plus one. So we can't split people in half. So if you have 5 members present and voting, then a majority of the, half of that membership would be 3 members. So you would need 3 yes votes in order to pass. There are certain rules around abstention, which is something you may or may not have had exposure to. But if someone abstains, essentially they are present, but they are saying that they are not going to vote on an item. And in the rules of parliamentary procedure that the council has adopted for our advisory bodies as well as themselves, an abstention is treated the same. All members are treated as present and voting. So if someone chooses to abstain for whatever reason, their vote is counted as a no vote. So an abstention is essentially a no vote. Planning has a specific rule for their membership. They do have to have 3 positive yes votes in order for a vote to pass. So even if a majority is less than 3, there has to be 3 positive votes. So if you have a quorum, you have to have 3 members present, and you only have 3 members present for that meeting, all 3 members would have to vote in affirmative in order for that motion to pass. And then city committees require a simple majority of not less than 3 members. And that's for all of our city committees. A motion with a tie vote would fail. And then again, as I mentioned, an abstention vote is essentially a no vote. And then I just put a couple of examples there for a 5-member body so that you could see 2 yes votes, 2 no votes, and an abstention would fail, because essentially that's 2 yes, 3 no, which is not a majority in favor. Whereas 3 yeses and a no and an abstention would be a majority in favor, because you have those 3 yes votes and 2 no votes. And then when a member is absent, they are not there, their vote does not count. So now you've gone down to 4 members. If you have 2 yes, 2 no, you do not have a majority, you have a tie, and a tie vote would fail. Okay, so let's take a pause here and we're in the home stretch. We just have a little bit left, so I'll take pause here to see if there are any questions. Robin.
So there's a couple of things that I don't quite understand about the motions. So on the slide where you had the basic motion, the motion to amend, and the substitute motion, how does the substitute motion come to be? I mean, I know that if somebody wants to amend the motion, then, and the person that made the motion agrees to it, then it can be amended. But how does someone come up with a completely different motion before the original motion has been voted on, or I don't understand how that works.
So this typically, the type of situation you see this in is when there is a legislative body who is not necessarily in agreement in how they want to move forward on something. So you may have a discussion, like for example, this discussion here, say this is a discussion about a development project that includes a requirement of that development to have the ground floor be a commercial space, and there's a requirement that a restaurant be part of what is built. So that may be the proposed action by staff, and it may be what is the motion is made on. When that motion is, the members start to discuss and debate that, there may be conversation, and there may be some of the members on the body who don't want that to be what is put there. Maybe they don't think a restaurant is appropriate at that particular intersection because there's a restaurant right across the street, and they think there's a real shortage of parks in that area. It's within their purview of what they're approving. That individual has a different viewpoint, can ask in that debate, they can bring forward an additional substitute motion and say, well, I want to make a motion to vote on this. And this is where the second comes in to help, because there has to be at least one other person who says, yes, I think we should consider this. Because that basic motion that was first made and then discussed and then resulted in an additional different motion being made, that is why that substitute motion is voted on first. If it doesn't pass, then the membership would go back to that original discussed motion, and that motion would be voted on. Does that answer your question?
I think so. So the substitute motion has to have a second, but then it gets voted on first. Okay.
Correct. And it's not always the there's not always multiple motions on the floor. And this
Right.
really, again, this happens in more in-depth conversations where there's not agreement on the board. Typically what you see is a discussion on that basic motion, and then they either vote to approve it or they don't, right? If there's not agreement. But there are circumstances where people feel that they want to move the action forward, but they have a different idea of how they want that action to move forward, but it's substantially different than what was originally put on, or the motion that was originally made to be voted on.
Yeah, it would make more sense to me that you first vote on the original one and then somebody could make another one, but I guess that's not the procedure. So
Yeah,
then,
that's,
so then the whole thing of discussion, the way I thought things went is that you have a motion, it gets seconded, then you open it up for discussion, and then you vote on it. Is that correct? Is that the correct sequence of events?
you can, there is some flexibility there in terms of how you move through that item. But the one thing that you have to ensure is that public comment is taken prior to action being taken. So before the vote is taken, the public has to have the ability to weigh in on the item being discussed.
Okay, so that's the public comment, but I'm talking about the
Yes.
discussion among the board.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood you. Yeah, so the discussion, it really depends on how the item progresses. Sometimes there's substantial discussion before a motion is made. So then there's not really anything else that the members wish to discuss. They're ready to vote on the motion because whatever the motion was made was kind of based on what that conversation was. And so everyone's already kind of in agreement about how they want to move forward. Alternatively, you may have that motion and then the discussion really is had after the motion is made. And that's when you would have the vote following the discussion. So it can be done either way procedurally. It doesn't have to be one way or the other.
Yeah, I guess it just seems like it would be good to make it a little bit more formal, that even if you have a motion, you have it seconded, and then you make sure, even if you think everybody agrees, that you open it up, you say, is there any discussion? I mean, that's the way I've always, seen it done and done it, just to make sure that you don't misunderstand whether there's agreement or not. But I guess you're saying you don't have to do it that way. And then the
Yeah.
thing that I don't understand also is the whole motion to adjourn. So someone can make a motion to adjourn while there's a motion that's not been voted on, while there's still something on the floor?
Yes, technically, yes. So and it's not something that's done a lot, but it is part of what is outlined in Rosenberg's Rules of Order. But essentially what's more relevant to this than this likely being a motion that's made when there's another motion outstanding is the fact that these three motions have an exception in terms of the debate. So these are three things that can't be debated. There's no discussion, there's no debate. It's made and then you vote. You either want to do it or you don't, because there's not really, it's either you want to adjourn or you don't want to adjourn. There's not really a decision to make other than that. So that's the more important thing for these three. It's not necessarily, I wouldn't say it's common that these type of things are put up when there's a motion open, except for the motion to table. That one is one that you would commonly see if there is a motion on the table that's being discussed. Then someone wants to table that discussion, that would happen while that basic motion was on the table. And technically that motion to table would be a substitute motion because it's a completely different action than taking action on the motion that was made. And therefore that one would be voted on first before that basic motion. So,
but so if there's a motion on the table, it hasn't been voted on yet, and somebody says that they have a motion to adjourn and everybody votes yes on that, then you have this open motion on the table that was never resolved and the meeting is adjourned?
It would be part of that, the unfinished business on the agenda with that meeting being adjourned. And yes, it would have been on the table, but it would just be reflected in the minutes that it was not voted on because a motion to adjourn was passed.
Huh.
So that is,
so is there any requirement that it be brought up in the next meeting, or it just dies?
It would essentially just die, but the adjournment with items still remaining, typically we see those. In those circumstances, what it is typically is when the meeting is running really long and there's still items to discuss, but the membership is like, it's 10:30, it's 11 o'clock. We think it's getting too late. We've been at this for 5 hours, so we want to adjourn. And typically those type of motions usually have a date and time that they're adjourning to in order to continue
Yeah, right.
the business of
Yeah,
the meeting.
okay.
So in those circumstances, then that would carry over and the discussion would pick up where it had left off.
Okay, yep. Thanks. Those are all my questions.
Great, thank you. Great questions. Dave.
Yeah, I have a comment, not a question. I'll try to keep it brief. Earlier on, one of your slides, later we see that, it gets corrected later on. It said motion, second, vote. And, I've seen this happen. It has happened at the EQC all the time, where once a motion is made and it's seconded, the chair calls the question for the vote without any more conversation on the part of the board. And I've seen other city commissions and committees do that too. And that is really wrong, because number one of the virtues of having a motion on the table is that it allows people to focus their attention on this specific thing. And so it allows the conversation to focus and not just get more abstract. So I think the idea of really focusing on having a motion and then a lot of discussion and then a vote is something that I think makes meetings run better. And I believe that a little bit of your earlier material didn't make that clear. Later on, you did, but I think the earlier stuff does not.
I think, is this the slide that you're referring to, this one? Where it has the chair?
Yes.
So
motion, second, members vote. There should be discussion right in there, should say discussion.
So there, and this again, this is based on the general parliamentary procedure that is outlined in Rosenberg's Rules of Order. But this area is one of those areas where you will see that the process for a discussion will be one of those two ways, and those are both acceptable ways to progress forward. So if it's your advisory body and your chair is doing it in this way and you feel that it's more appropriate to do it in a different way, that is a discussion that you can have with your advisory body. And perhaps you guys will make a determination that you will do it a little bit different, and you'll have a motion and then have discussion and then have a vote. It can be done either way. This is typically the way that we see council discussion go. They typically follow this outline, but there's nothing to preclude them from having additional discussion after a motion and second has been made prior to a vote. And sometimes that does happen, sometimes it doesn't. It just depends on how the discussion progresses. But either way is an acceptable way under parliamentary procedure.
Well, at the EQC, we have changed it, I think, generally, so that there is discussion after a motion. So, but I've just seen it so often, and it could be, it kind of implies, if you don't have a discussion after the motion in the second, it kind of implies that nothing is going to be accomplished unless you have full consensus on whatever committee there is. And
And that's a valid point. And I think in that circumstance, if there's discussion and there's a motion that's made at the end of that, and there's no additional discussion before the membership votes, if there's not consensus, the motion doesn't pass, then the discussion continues, and maybe a different motion or an alternative motion may be made following that discussion. So there's always the chance of that happening. I think sometimes I think there's two ways of looking at it. One is that if you have that open discussion and members are talking about their opinions and their views and how they would like to proceed, that discussion gets them to a point where they get to some kind of consensus where they understand what everyone is kind of looking for, and then someone chooses to make a motion that reflects that, and then the membership is in support of that. I think the opposite, you can have a motion that can be made, but there could be substantial discussion following that motion, and then it becomes very apparent that there's not consensus, but now you have a motion that either needs to be withdrawn or needs to be voted on and fail in order to continue the discussion forward. So I think that there's pros and cons on both ways of doing it, but both ways are perfectly acceptable under parliamentary procedure.
Okay,
so
thanks.
Holly, not to speak out of turn, but I think if you go to the first slide on motion, so 2 more slides forward, 1 more. Here's where I was sort of interpreting the same thing that Dave was no, go back. Yeah.
Sorry.
Motion with a second followed by a vote on the proposed action with no mention of discussion. So that's what
Gotcha.
I was kind of looking at. And maybe Dave was also kind of looking at that. So but
Okay.
I think you've clarified it.
But that is again, this is the first time we've done this training. So that is still good feedback for me to make sure that that's more clear in future training. So I appreciate the feedback.
Yep.
Okay, let's see, Dorian.
Hi, Holly. Thank you for calling on me. The one thing I want to ask about was the chair being able to sort of unilaterally close debate. That part stuck out to me as someone who's had to follow Robert's rules quite a bit and with a bunch of lawyers. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because my understanding is that not only does it require a vote, but that's a 2/3 vote because of sort of the, the anti sort of democratic nature of closing a debate.
So let's see. And just again, to clarify the typo I had, it is Rosenberg's Rules of Order, not Robert's Rules of Order. They're very similar. I mean, there's a lot of similarities between the two, but there are some nuances that are different. But I'm looking at one of which we'll talk a little bit about resources in a minute, but one of the resources that I have put together based on the content in Rosenberg's Rules of Order is kind of a motions at a glance. And it has the different types of motions and what kind of language you would use to be introducing that type of motion, whether or not you can interrupt or talk over something that's currently being discussed, if there's a second needed, if it's debatable, amendable, and the votes that are needed. And so the limit for limiting debate, you are correct that one does require a 2/3 vote in order to limit the debate and move forward. But there is a rule for in Rosenberg's Rules of Order that gives the chair the authorization to override that and essentially call for the vote. So they do have the ability as the chair to determine that it's time to take a vote and move forward on that item.
Thank you.
And Holly, when that happens, did you say that it has to be 2/3 vote then?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, let's see, Rosa.
Just real quick, did you say that majority is majority plus one or just majority to pass the motion?
It's a half of the body plus one. So all of our advisory bodies are odd numbers, right? So a majority of 5 would be 3, a majority of 7 would be 4. So it's a majority of the membership.
Oh, okay, because I'm sorry, the plus one. Okay, you know what? I'm just gonna take 3 as a majority of 5 because half of it's just the plus one to me makes it 4 to me. Like, so it's 3 passes out of 5, not 4 out of 5.
Correct.
Okay.
It's a simple majority.
And it's 4 out of 7.
Yes.
Okay, that's all I need to know. 3. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, I don't see any other hands, but are there any other questions before I move on to the last short section? No. Okay. Okay, so the last piece I just want to talk about is the resources that you guys have available. So the primary, as I mentioned earlier, the primary resource that you guys have that has all the information that we've reviewed today in more detail and has links and bookmarks embedded in the document to take you to all of the source information. So for example, the Brown Act, there is a reference to where that is in government code. There's also access to the League of California Cities primer, which is much easier to read and understand than reading the legislation itself. Same with Rosenberg's Rules of Order. There's also a very detailed memo and supporting information from the city attorney related to conflict of interest. All of that information is accessible through that member handbook. In addition to that, on the city's website, there is a member tools page under the commission section of the website, which the URL is up there on your screen. And that page has not only the member handbook, but it also has all those source documentation. And that does include a lot of the resolutions that have been passed by the city council, such as the code of conduct that we discussed earlier. All of those resources are available there for you guys to be able to access. The next best resource for you is your staff liaison. And again, the staff liaison is the subject matter expertise on what your advisory body is responsible for. So the best person to go to, especially if you don't know who to ask, is to go to your staff liaison. And then last but not least, your additional resource would be myself and Lena in the city clerk's office. Again, we touch everything advisory body related. We are the ones who are the subject matters on all of the legislation and regulations that relate to your role on an advisory body, whereas the staff liaison is the subject matter on the subject matter jurisdiction that you guys are responsible for. We're the subject matter we have the subject matter jurisdiction for all things that guide and form the regulations that create all of this information that we're talking about today. The membership tools, again, that information is on the website, including this handbook for advisory body members. So part of, oh, actually, I'm going to pause real quick. So, Doreen, did you have another question? Dorian, are you there? Looks like your hand is back up. Did you have another question? Okay, so the last piece of information that I want to share is with the implementation of this requirement for training on orientation training on and review of the handbook, in order to make sure that we have a mechanism that allows people who are appointed throughout the year for an unexpected vacancy or an existing vacancy that we have that aren't able to attend our annual training that we do live. The way in which we're going to capture everybody is anybody who wasn't able to attend this training can review this training online. And then after you attend the training or review that training, the last page in the handbook for city advisory body members is actually an acknowledgement form that you have read the handbook and you have attended the training. It's a simple form that you fill out your information, the advisory body that you're appointed to, and the date that you either participated in the training or reviewed the training video online. This is the last page in your orientation manual. It is also directly linked on the website. It can be filled out in submitted via email. It does not have to be an original signature, and it can also be submitted electronically. It is set up as a form through our website, so you can click on that link. It'll take you to those fields for you to fill out, and you'll just type your name instead of signing, and that will complete your requirement for attending this orientation training today. And then that document, if it is not submitted electronically, which will come automatically to me, just make sure that that form is submitted to the city clerk's office. It can be submitted via email, which is on the prior slide. So with that, I know that there was a lot of content today, and I am more than happy to have any one-on-one conversations with anybody if anyone wants to have a more detailed conversation about anything, but I would just like to give one last opportunity for anybody on the call who may have any questions related to anything that we have talked about today. Pamela.
I just want to confirm what I just heard you said. We need to complete the confirmation that we've done this workshop today. We need to go to the website, fill that out, and then submit it to you. So you're not taking attendance as to who was on this call today?
I am not, and the reason for that is because it's not only attendance at this training, but acknowledging that you have read the content of the advisory body handbook that you're provided. So it's attesting to both of those things. And that, again, it's available on several locations, including on the membership tools website. It's the final page of the handbook for city advisory body members, and it's also electronically submittable using that link on the membership tool page.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? All right, well, I want to just let everyone know that I really appreciate you taking the time to be here today. I know that I speak for City Council when I say that they really do appreciate all of the time that you all invest in your volunteering your time to participate on a city advisory body, and they're extremely grateful that you have provided that service to your community. So I encourage you all to continue serving and encourage others to apply and reach out to people who may be interested. We're always looking for additional individuals to serve. We have several vacancies open right now. I would be happy to talk to anyone who may be interested. So please feel free to send people my way. Thank you again, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their night.
Thank you, Holly. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Holly. Yep.